On point, spot on. That's what you want to hear when you make a statement. However, many people just waffle. They are all over the place. And you might have found yourself in that situation where you say, well, afterwards, I thought my statements were not really making a good point. Or maybe you have an idea of what you should have said, but now it's too late because you're already home. And you now have the great idea, which you might have needed when you stood in front of your client. And we are talking about how to make brilliant statements, spot-on statement, and exact statements exactly when you need them. The problem is that often we learn to waffle. We learn to just talk and chat and yada, yada, yada on, because we start many talks, many chats, many speeches, many statements. Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for welcoming me. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a privilege to be here with you today, blah, blah, blah. And the next problem is we learned that for decades. I still see university, business schools, public schools, private schools teaching that you open a speech with, hello, my name is John Smith. I am blah, blah, blah from company XYZ. And when you have any qualified coach, this is not how to start any speech. But the problem is we learned this way of approaching, to talk, to present, to speak, many decades as a socially accepted method. In politics, you often see people, and often these people are perceived in a way that they say, well, talking a lot, but saying nothing. And when you talk about the filibuster, where people can just talk for hours only to prevent a law and to prevent that the law becomes active or becomes a law in their country, you see that many people misuse the talk, the speech, the waffling, the being all over the place only to get their own agenda through. However, these are all bad examples. These are all bad examples of bad speeches, of bad people, and of people who have no clue how to make a statement which is simply spot on. Unfortunately, we often think, well, I like to talk a bit longer because it is so much easier. And of course it is. I just give you an example. Let's just think of what you do. What do you do for a living? And now I tell you, I want you to present me what you do. Give a presentation. Oh, by the way, you have 7 minutes. And that's the point where you say, oh, that's not a lot of time. And when I say 5 minutes or 3 minutes, it gets even tougher. It is now very important that we have to accept that talking longer is simply easier. When you have the experience, when you have the knowledge, it's very important to acknowledge that talking for a long time is easier than making a statement which is spot on in 1, 2, 3 minutes. But often, and let's face it, your customers and clients, especially in the online world, give you less and less time to present. These customers are there only to hear what you deliver as a value to them. And they don't want to hear your 90-minute speech about blah, 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 me, look at me, we are the greatest, the best quality leader, blah, blah, blah. This is all stuff that anyone says. There is no benefit, no value in there. You need to be spot on when you talk to other people. And I speak from experience because, as you can hear by my charming German accent, and maybe you hear the German accent, I speak in my second language. And I learned it the hard way that waffling is not how you make a point. So how to do it better? Oh, by the way, first, better. Thank you very much again. We are the top 150 again, which is very flattering. Your support is truly amazing. And we were awarded the top 10 ranking by FeedSpot. Go on feedspot.com. You find the Sustainable Leadership Podcast, and we are ranked on number 7 in the top 10, which came as a total surprise. And I'm very proud of that because it only happened due to your support. So thank you very much, because talking better seems to work quite well. However, we are now talking about how to make your speeches, your statements better. So first, when you start to talk, you need to have an opening which is extremely strong. And of course, many of you might now think of the same thing. But what you often say, you use something in between a cliche or flowery phrase, something where you say something like, hello, my name is John Smith. I'm the Senior Project Manager of XYZ Limited. Thank you very much for inviting me. It is a privilege to be with you here today. Let's get started. But before I start, I tell you something about the XYZ Limited company. And that's where people just doze off. It is like giving free narcotics to them. Because as soon as you use these cliches or any motivational phrase, any kind of verbiage, any kind of set phrase where people simply know what's happening, they stop listening, because we do not have any time to waste. And the more people are allowed to decide, the less prone people are to listen to you, because there are so many competitors on the market. Maybe we listen to someone who gets to the point. So how can I now start in a way which is a bit more engaging? So one aspect, I'm going to give you 3+1 options today. So the first one is you start with a keyword or maybe a buzzword. I don't like the term buzzword because it sounds so much as marketing and some BS bingo word, but we're talking about keywords here. Let's say you want to talk about, let's take something which is not too easy, purchasing, the purchasing department. Very abstract. Many people don't know what's happening there. And you need to talk about how to optimize the processes in the purchasing department. So when you step in front of people, many will think you start with, hello, my name is blah, 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 blah. What you will do is you start with, and now listen closely, you start with purchasing. Very important here to have the pause after you gave the keyword, because now you have two groups in the audience. Group number one, you get their attention because they say, oh, that's an interesting opening, because I didn't expect that. I expected something like hello and welcome and yada, yada, but no, okay, so we're getting straight to the point. The other group will not have paid attention. You always have these people in the room. They only hear the silence. And when they hear the silence, they think, oh, I think someone asked me something. Did I miss something? And then you have their attention as well. Remember from school, when suddenly the whole room became quiet and you looked up, that was the moment where the teacher picked you to answer a question, but you didn't get it. So the keyword method is step number one. What you could, option number one, sorry. So option number two could be you start with a question, but please ask questions that surprise people or provoke people, that are a bit more insightful than a motivational, inspirational phrase, or you asking them, how many people in the room want to make more money? Because, of course, anyone wants to make more money. If you want to ask questions where no one really has to answer, you will not get any reaction and you won't get their attention. If, of course, you now want to say, maybe you want to use a question and then you want to stick to, let's say, data or something which you found out. So you want to use statistics. Statistics are an excellent way to get people's attention, but they have to be surprising. When I start a talk and say 85% of smokers have more lung diseases than non-smokers, you would say, wow, whoa, such an insight. Who could have thought that tar in your lung and maybe nicotine isn't the most healthiest option? Totally surprising. Thank you. Next. No, statistics. So first you need to know your source. So check your sources. Something you found on Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or anywhere on social media might be completely made up. And we had way too many people doing that. So be sure to check your source, because when someone asks you, you have to deliver these sources. So either open with a keyword or with a question or with a statistic. These are only 3 out of many different options. It is now important if you want to say, well, I need a bit of a longer opening and I want to get to people's emotions because I know that they are experts. They know the facts. So I need to grab them by the emotion. And now you need a technique which is known as storytelling, and business storytelling is what I mean. Storytelling is often misused by people who do not have any content. And then they just tell a very touching story, which is in most cases completely made up or stolen from somewhere else. So only tell stories which you have seen and lived through by yourself. And of course, younger people might now say, well, that's a bit unfair because people who work longer have more stories. And the answer is yes, they do. It's an unfair advantage. It's called experience. And there's no fast forward for experience. The longer you work, the longer you're in the working world, the more you know to tell people. And that's why it's important to document your stories. When you have great stories, put them in a sheet, Microsoft Excel. You know, that's what Germans do when they want to have fun. Spreadsheets. Anyway, so talking about stories, your story has to be built up in a certain way. Otherwise, it will be completely all over the place. It's the so-called Spe Principle, developed by Alan Stevens, one of the most well-known media mentors in the UK. Not only my mentor, but also a great friend, meanwhile, the Spe Principle. And the S stands for story. It is now important to tell a story in a way that people know that you lived through the story. And this happens by details. So, for example, you could say, oh, we have a client in Canary Wharf, and they purchased that, and that worked very well. And of course, people would say, yeah, that's made up. You could say, we have a client in Canary Wharf, and of course, not the Canary Wharf you know. When you walk, let's say, to Canary Wharf, and then you walk by the Harbour Exchange straight through, and then you see the Chinese boat with a small restaurant and the supermarket in there, and you keep on walking, and suddenly you see the residential area where you have the cranes and the little boats where people live on, and maybe a pub or two, and some small restaurants, but not many anymore. And you see the residential area and the huge, I don't want to say pond, but sort of a pond with the water. There we have a client and then you tell what you've done with them. Oh, by the way, when you walk exactly that route, which you can do past Harbour Exchange, and there's the Chinese boat with the small supermarket in there, which is on top, and the small restaurant, which is on the lower level, you will not find a company there because it's a residential area. So I just gave you a random example here, but the details are all exactly correct. The story now is focusing on something, because otherwise the story is pointless. And that is the second aspect. The P stands for point. What's the point? And the point means relevance. When your story is not relevant by itself for your audience, it means people will stop listening to you. When you work in the purchasing department and you talk to people who work in the social sector, and they have nothing to do with purchasing, they will not listen. When you talk to CEOs, CFOs, CTOs, and they need to update the purchasing process from a technical point of view to have more profit and to run the company in a more efficient and more effective way, they will listen because they know there's a point, there's a relevance to them. Unfortunately, many people now stop there. They stop after they deliver the point. And that is, of course, not how it should be. Step number 3 is the example. Of course, you should expect now that people draw their conclusions from your story and the point. However, some people do not, or they draw the wrong conclusions from it, and you want to make sure that they got your core message. So after you have the story and they see the point, so a story including as many details as you can, a point which delivers a high level of relevance to your target audience that is listening to you. The third step is the example, which is introduced with the words, and that means for you. And then you give them insight into the advantages of the ideas you have. And that is the storytelling principle of story, point, example, delivered and developed by Alan Stevens. And by the way, very important now, you must be an expert in what you talk about. I very clearly distance myself from people who say with storytelling, you can sell absolutely anything. You can pretend you're an expert in something you're not. If you go down this route, true experts will find out because your story will have holes. They ask for it and you will fail. Your point will not be relevant because it's not specific enough. And your example will fail because they ask questions to find out that your example is neither true nor useful. So storytelling is not a technique which you use to cover up a lack of either content or expertise. A very important point. And when you finish your phrase, and when you finish your presentation, and of course, I could now give a whole talk only about how to finish a speech. That's a different story. Always finish at the very end. Always have a next step. So after you got the applause, or in Germany, they do knocking on the table. Don't ask us why we do that. It's just weird, but we do it. Germans are weird. We know that. I am one of them. I'm sorry for that. So always end with the next step. It means after you got the applause, after you had the discussions, then you say, so what? What's the next step? And of course, the next step now would be if you say, hey, I need to know more about this, go to expert.nb-networks.com. As soon as you are there, just put your email address in there. Once a week, 100% content, no advertising. It's an ad-free guarantee. Once per week, you get all the aspects which I publish in one email, which is sent out on every Wednesday morning. Just go to expert.nb-networks.com. And maybe you now say, hey, I have one of these presentations, but I still have a question, Niels. Could you help me with it? And yes, I could. Just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com, and we talk about that. Of course, when you now say, hey, I have an immediate need of training, speaking, coaching, consulting, or you have mentoring, maybe something more long-term, project interim management, let me know. I'm happy to help you with that. But free of charge, you can contact me to get your question clarified, nb@nb-networks.com. I am looking forward to talking with you very soon. And now it is important that you apply what you learned in this podcast in your organization, because only when you apply what you heard, you will be able to see the change in the organization which you want to see happening. I wish you all the best. I'm happy to help you with it. Let me know if you need any help. But now go to your organization, put the change in place, because only the application means that you truly are a positive driver, an engaged driver of positive change. And I wish you all the best with all the tasks you now have to fulfill. Wish you all the best implementing the changes in your organization. And for this week, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.